Into the world of politics now, and the Ditsobotla local municipality is in limbo after the resignation of its mayor. It all happened rather quickly. The Patriotic Alliance's Elizabeth Lethoko resigned just a few hours after she was elected. Lethoko took the decision after coalition partner the ANC tabling a motion to appoint an interim municipal manager. Now, the PA is saying it was not consulted. So once again, we find ourselves in a situation where no one seems to know what's happening in this part of the country. Joined now by elections analyst Wayne Sussman. We've dragged him back in again after local government elections. I'm sure you remember Wayne. Wayne, good to have you back on the show. There's two things I want to try and understand here. One, what is the play here? What happened? How did we get here? And two, the significance. But first, just take me through how we got to this point. Morning.
Sure. So we had a rerun of the elections in Ditsobotla because the situation was as such that there were two mayors, two speakers, two municipal managers, and became untenable, and the council was dissolved. So in late last year, voters of Ditsobotla, which are primarily the towns of Lichtenburg and Kolini in the northwest province, went back to the polls. And the ANC fell under 50%. And that meant for the first time in democratic history in South Africa, in this ANC stronghold, the ANC had to go looking for coalition partners. It does a deal with the Patriotic Alliance led by Gayton McKenzie, this Northwest party called the Forum for Service Delivery, and a small party called the African Heart Congress, which gives them a majority. Part of that coalition agreement sees first that the ANC gets elected as speaker. Okay, so the ANC are still currently in that speaker position. That's part of the coalition agreement. That person the speaker hasn't resigned. The other part of the coalition agreement was that the Patriotic Alliance, with its 2 seats, was going to don the mayoral chain. And Itumeleng, Elizabeth Lethoko, wins the mayoral chain. And then the ANC, as you said in introduction, tries to, according to the Patriotic Alliance, force this item through the agenda of an appointment of the municipal manager, which wasn't discussed amongst the coalition partners, and Lethoko resigns, and the instability of Ditsobotla continues.
So it's all just basically fallen flat, regardless of what everybody had discussed behind the scenes. Do you have any insight why they would have gone and tried to change what essentially was the rules of engagement? Everybody seemed to be on the same page. You get a piece of the pie, I get a piece of the pie, we carry on. So why do you think it may have fallen over?
Well, the speaker is a very important position. They don't get to don that beautiful golden mayoral chain, but they determine the business of the council agenda. And the speaker might have discussed with the ANC colleagues, which is by far the largest party in the coalition, and said, we need to discuss this now. My understanding is also that the ANC on a national level wasn't seeing exactly eye to eye with the ANC on the provincial level. And this decision about the municipal manager comes from the ANC on a provincial level. And what's absolutely vital for coalitions to work is that there needs to be an agreement from the national level to the provincial level to the local level, because agreements made between Gayton McKenzie and Kenny Kunene and their counterparts in the ANC NEC need to be respected by the provincial structures and then the local structures.
So as you say, it's all fallen apart for the moment. What happens next? Because as you say, there were elections held now to try and undo the mess from before, create stability, but actually not much has changed. Do we know, Wayne, what happens next now to try and fix this?
The pace in Ditsobotla in that part of the world is quite slow, but a lot happened yesterday. So early in the morning, the Patriotic Alliance said that there were going to be no more talks. Last night it emerged that the PA would be engaging the ANC on a national level to try to rectify this mess. If that mess gets rectified, I'm confident that Itumeleng Elizabeth Lethoko will be re-elected for the second time as Mayor of Ditsobotla. Gareth, by the way, I think that's a record in South African history. We've never seen a mayor been in a position for such short time. So maybe if she gets re-elected at the next council setting, she'll be in power for longer.
And I think we need to be very clear about the wording we're using. We're not talking about reinstated. We're now having to have a re-election again.
Correct. She has formally resigned. And again, to remind the viewers, the speaker from the ANC hasn't resigned. They are still in that position. They will determine the next council meeting is. When that next council meeting happens, the first order of business will be the election of the mayor.
You live and breathe for this. I know you do when you were with us for the local government elections, and every time we get you in, I can see how much you love this. But surely even you as Wayne Sussman has to start questioning coalition governments, because it doesn't seem to work very well, whether it's at Tshwane, whether it's Johannesburg, now in an area like Ditsobotla as well. And we're hurtling very quickly to 2024 and talk of national coalition governments. We don't seem to have a very good record of this, do we?
It's a great point you make, Gareth. So when we think of the Speaker, we usually think of Parliament and the EFF giving the Speaker a hard time. But that is an environment where the ANC has an outright majority and it doesn't really care or isn't so concerned what the other parties think. In places like Ditsobotla, in places like Tshwane, it's coalition politics. And the Speaker, first of all, we have to see how important the position of Speaker is. That's the first point I want to make. And just briefly, the second point is coalition politics has to work better. More and more South Africans chose to live in towns and cities and rural areas where they didn't have faith in one party to rule outright. And parties have to have a long-term orientation. Otherwise, I might get invited back more and more to speak about the mess, to speak about the instability. Those coalition partners need to remember that service delivery has to come first. The collection of revenue, the collection of garbage, and the creation of an environment where those towns and cities can create jobs and create employment for people.
I've still got quite a bit of time with you, so I want to pick your brain around why you think that these coalitions fall over, because as you suggested as to what was happening in Ditsobotla, is that there were agreements in place. What do you think suddenly happens behind the scenes? Does someone get greedy? Does someone see a missed opportunity that maybe they should have gone harder on during the negotiations? Because it all seems to be fine when you talk to these political parties beforehand. They get behind closed doors, and once those doors reopen again, we've got a very different picture. What do you think actually happens behind the scenes?
Sadly, I think there's a lot of short-term orientation. People, in order to implement a great vision, to lift a town, a municipality like Ditsobotla up, need a long-term orientation. I think a lot of the councillors are just focused on the period between now and the next local government elections. Sadly, is it in for themselves? What position can they get? A municipal manager at the end of the day signs the paychecks at the end of the month. That's a vital position. No wonder the ANC and other parties care so much about this. So can we incentivize councillors across the length and breadth of this country to have more of a medium and long-term orientation, not just for the residents, but for the general future of these places?
I've heard one or two critics say before that if we stopped worrying more about elections and more about governance, we get a lot done. And I hadn't given the comment much thought, but when you work out the maths of our election cycle, it's local government elections, then we start gearing up for national elections. Then we go back into getting ready for local government elections. We just seem to be, as a country and as politicians, campaigning all the time. And every now and then you'll find a bit of a stopgap where some governance actually happens. We're too worried, aren't we, about our position in government from a local level onto a national level, and not much actually gets done.
Sure. So in America, in the House of Representatives, they have elections every 2 years. That means that if you're elected, once you get re-elected, you have to start raising money immediately for your re-election. In South Africa, we have our elections every 5 years, and then our local government elections just about a year or two after that, also every 5 years. I call the local government elections our midterms. I think we shouldn't have one single election. I know that someone like Wedi Mantashe has put that idea forward historically. I think we should continue to separate local government elections from provincial and national government elections. I think it's a different dynamic in the local government elections. I also think they provide a check on those who are in power, whether it's the DA in the Western Cape or the ANC currently in 8 out of the other 9 provinces. I think it's important to have 2 sets of elections, and that parties know that if they get a reality check in the midterm elections, our local government elections, that they need to pull up their socks. And right now, the ANC should look at the result in Ditsobotla, where, by the way, about 11 years ago, they got over 70% of the vote. In December, they got 40% of the vote. And they need to say, we need to do our best in this coalition to turn Ditsobotla around and do a better job. Because otherwise, if we get 40% in Ditsobotla in the 2024 elections, it is a disaster.
Yeah, it certainly could be a disaster. As you say, take a look at these numbers now, see what can be adjusted, because the next national election's not far away. We can now start saying next year, can't we? Last year it was, 2 years away. Now suddenly it's coming up next year, and that's where you're going to be very busy. Wayne Sussman is going to be with us, no doubts, next year, and also as these little issues come up, they start becoming very, very important in the build-up to 2024. My thanks to elections analyst Wayne Sussman for joining us this morning. It's 10